What if the Roman Empire's darkest disgrace wasn't its savage gladiator games or public executions, but something far more sinister taking place behind closed doors? While historians praise Roman civilization, law, and culture, they often pass over one of the empire's darkest institutions, the organized exploitation of young boys kept as private servants by Rome's elite. These weren't infrequent scandals or isolated events. This was a structured, legally sanctioned system where children as young as 10 were purchased, traded, and confined to lives of servitude. From senators to emperors, Rome's most influential men amassed teenage boys like valuable objects, using them for their darkest impulses while society turned the other way. The Roman Empire didn't merely seize territories and construct roads, it created a whole economy around the abuse of children. And the evidence, hidden in ancient writings, reveals horrors that make modern crimes seem faint in comparison. Roman male concubines held a defined and disturbing role in the empire's social hierarchy. Separate from ordinary household slaves in both function and treatment, while ordinary slaves handled domestic tasks, agricultural labor, or skilled crafts, male concubines served one central function: fulfilling their master's intimate desires. Roman law drew a firm distinction between these personal attendants and other classes of human property, with separate legal protections and market values. The word concubinus specifically described a male slave kept for intimate use. The Romans also used puer delicatus, meaning pleasure boy, or cotimatus, taken from the mythological Ganymede. These weren't adult relationships between consenting partners. Roman concubines were typically acquired between ages 10 and 16, with 12 being considered the ideal age for purchase, according to surviving slave market records. Roman law technically prohibited the assault of freeborn citizens, but slaves had no such protections. The Lex Antonia, enacted around 149 BCE/CE, sought to control intimate conduct, but its safeguards only applied to free citizens. Male concubines, regarded as property rather than persons in Roman legal thought, stood outside any real protection. Their masters could mistreat them without legal punishment, sell them onward, or even execute them with minimal legal supervision. The custom wasn't secret or disgraceful among Rome's upper ranks. Affluent Romans freely spoke of their concubines in letters and banquet discussions. Pliny the Younger noted casually about companions who kept handsome boys for amusement. Martial's epigrams mentioned the private use of young male slaves as ordinary domestic arrangements. This wasn't hidden conduct, but an accepted social custom among those with enough wealth to afford such indulgences. The monetary worth of male concubines greatly surpassed ordinary slaves. While a common farm slave might cost 2,000 sesterces, a charming young concubine could reach 50,000 sesterces or higher. Their price depended on physical looks, age, schooling status, and intimate knowledge. Virgin status raised their price considerably, as did ethnic origin, with Greek boys bringing premium costs due to assumed culture and learning. Roman households frequently kept several male concubines at once, forming rival hierarchies among the boys. Experienced concubines held somewhat better roles, sometimes supervising newer arrivals or organizing their master's private timetable. This order produced internal patterns of endurance and cooperation among victims caught in the same dreadful conditions, compelled to manage relations with both their oppressor and other victims. The network supplying Rome's demand for young male concubines functioned through several savage routes, each showing different kinds of human trafficking that would stun modern awareness. War prisoners supplied the greatest number of new concubines, with Roman legions deliberately selecting teenage boys during military operations. When Roman forces seized fresh lands, leaders permitted soldiers to take young captives as private possessions, yet the most appealing boys were kept for officers and later traded in city slave bazaars. Roman accounts from operations in Gaul, Germania, and Britain record the organized seizure of adolescent boys who were later moved in chains to major slave commerce hubs in Rome, Alexandria, and Ephesus. These boys endured forced marches of hundreds of miles, with many perishing on the way from fatigue, illness, or suicide attempts. Those who survived arrived shattered, starving, and utterly unready for what awaited them. Debt bondage created another constant flow of victims. Roman law permitted lenders to take children as settlement for household debts, and destitute families sometimes sold their own sons to endure financial hardship. These deals were lawful and widespread, with formal contracts listing the child's age, bodily state, and particular purpose. Guardians seldom saw their children again after such bargains, and boys sold into concubinage faced especially bleak destinies, since their intimate worth meant they would never be released through normal slave promotion routes. The slave bazaars themselves functioned with cold precision that hid their dreadful intent. Skilled slave traders kept careful registers describing offered boys, including body dimensions, intimate background, and particular talents. Purchasers could examine possible acquisitions through humiliating bodily inspections that amounted to violation. These checks involved confirmation of virginity, judgment of bodily growth, and testing of obedience and submissiveness. Values shifted widely based on precise qualities that purchasers preferred. Virgin boys from elite families seized in war brought the greatest prices, sometimes surpassing the price of grand estates. Physical attractiveness raised worth, but so did schooling and cultural polish. Greek boys were especially desired for their assumed cultivation, while Germanic prisoners were valued for their unusual looks and bodily power. The acquisition systems stretched across the empire, with specialist traders building knowledge in separate regional markets. Some concentrated on war prisoners from border campaigns, while others formed ties with poverty-stricken families ready to sell children. Experienced slave catchers even ran abduction networks, seeking defenseless boys from countryside districts where vanishings might pass unseen. Movement of young concubines brought further suffering and cruelty. Slave vessels packed scores of boys into storage spaces built for cargo instead of people. Numerous traders permitted sailors to mistreat the boys during voyage, believing that such treatment would leave them more obedient for later masters. Boys who fought back or tried to flee faced harsh floggings, marking, or intentional mutilation that would lower their market price as discipline. The whole structure functioned with lawful approval and public tolerance that sustained its dreadful scope. Roman citizens considered nothing immoral in buying children for private purposes, treating it as an ordinary indulgence for those with enough riches. This acceptance enabled the commerce to prosper publicly, with slave bazaars displaying their human stock beside animals and domestic wares. The everyday life of male concubines inside Roman homes formed a deliberately managed structure of exploitation, mental domination, and bodily cruelty that turned people into breathing possessions for their master's desire. These boys endured conditions that shattered their youthful identity and all chance of ordinary human growth, while confined in surroundings meant to increase their readiness and master gratification. Roman residences generally kept concubines in narrow chambers beside their masters' private rooms, guaranteeing constant reach while preserving the illusion of divided quarters. These chambers were intentionally bare and unpleasant, strengthening the boys' role as belongings instead of inhabitants. Most concubines occupied tight quarters with several other boys, forming packed conditions that blocked privacy or mental healing from constant mistreatment. The private tasks forced upon these children went far beyond basic violation, including staged displays meant to fulfill their masters' imaginations and prove total obedience. Masters required their concubines to show eagerness and delight during private meetings, regardless of their true emotions. Boys who failed to believably show joy during mistreatment suffered harsh discipline, creating mental torment that deepened the bodily suffering. Many Roman homes created strict timetables controlling their concubines' access, with separate boys assigned to certain days or hours according to their master's tastes. These timetables handled people like amusement scheduling, with boys required to ready themselves through washing, tidying, and mental focus for private encounters they lacked power to deny. The mental conditioning used to preserve dominance over concubines depended on the methodical erasure of their identity and independence. Masters intentionally cut boys off from outside contact, blocking friendships or bonds that could offer emotional help or chances for defiance. Boys were barred from speaking about their treatment with household servants and endured discipline for showing sorrow or misery that could disrupt their master's illusion of willing cooperation. Bodily punishment for defiance or weak eagerness during private encounters varied from floggings and deprivation to intentional mutilation that would permanently signal a boy's refusal to obey. Some masters marked their concubines with ownership signs, handling them like cattle, while guaranteeing they could never flee their role, even if they somehow secured liberty. The absolute absence of freedom reached into every part of their lives. Concubines could not select their meals, garments, daily duties, or contact with others. Masters dictated their rest patterns, frequently summoning boys for private encounters during night hours, causing constant fatigue that further reduced their strength to resist or reason clearly about their circumstances. Instructional opportunities, when granted, served their master's benefit instead of the boy's progress. Some concubines were given lessons in music, verse, or speaking arts that would render them more pleasing companions during private encounters. This schooling formed a bitter parody of ordinary youth growth, where study became another instrument of exploitation rather than individual advancement. The emotional damage to these children appeared in multiple kinds of mental collapse that Roman writings record with unsettling indifference. Numerous concubines fell into deep despair, with certain reports noting boys who ceased talking completely or practiced self-injury as their sole method of showing control. Others formed dissociative patterns, mentally withdrawing during mistreatment by separating from their bodily awareness. Medical treatment for concubines centered chiefly on preserving their usefulness rather than their complete health or welfare. Household doctors treated wounds and illnesses that could damage their looks or usefulness while neglecting mental trauma or other ailments that failed to reduce their worth to their master. The rankings that formed among several concubines inside single households produced further mental torment, as boys vied for marginally kinder handling or lessened cruelty by showing greater obedience or display. The structure blocked unity among victims while producing internal rivalries that deepened the isolation of each boy from possible emotional comfort. Some concubines formed captivity bond-style attachments to their masters, frantically chasing approval or kindness from their tormentors as a mental survival response. Roman authors occasionally read these trauma reactions as proof that the boys welcomed their condition, revealing the cultural blindness that permitted such organized cruelty to continue unchecked. The lasting developmental damage on survivors who later secured freedom involved serious trouble building stable relationships, persistent despair, and a total absence of practical abilities needed for self-reliant survival. Numerous former concubines stayed mentally reliant on controlled, abusive conditions.